President Trump is posting. And again, I've read this a few times. I can't really make sense of it. It sort of circles in on itself a few times. Our government lawyers do not think we have the legal authority to pay SNAP with certain monies we have available. Now courts have issued conflicting opinions on what we can and can't do. I've instructed our lawyers to ask the court to clarify how we can legally fund SNAP as soon as possible. Even if we get immediate guidance, it will unfortunately be delayed while states get the money out, yada, yada. It will be my honor to provide the funding, just like I did the military and law enforcement pay. But again, they're getting very minutely legalistic all of a sudden. Can you make any sense of that?
Yeah, I think the president should let the federal judges interpret the law. That's kind of what we do in this country. That's what our Constitution does. And the federal judges have been very clear. There was just no legal basis for what the president has done. Playing politics with people's lives is not only immoral, but it's unlawful. And the court was crystal clear that come Monday, these systems have to be turned on and millions of people need to be able to get their SNAP entitlements.
All right, Skye Perryman, who's part of one of the organizations that was arguing that case today. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, joins me now. Congressman, are you encouraged by both the court decisions and also, again, I don't know, is this a change of policy from Trump? Or the DOJ lawyers going to listen to him? They're going to appeal. But does this sound like maybe SNAP might actually get, those funds might get released?
Yeah, well, I'm extremely encouraged because the courts found that not only was it possible for the government to use these emergency funds to pay SNAP beneficiaries, 41 million people across the country who depend on them for food, but it was obligatory. It's necessary.
Right.
They've got to do it. So Trump and his team have egg all over their face because they were saying, no way, it can't be done. This is impossible. We're not going to do it. They went to court to fight it, and they lost. And now they're facing the question, well, do they appeal to show how much they really don't want those people to have the nutrition that Congress provided for them? Or is he going to turn around and pretend that somehow, oh, this was his big game plan originally? He always wanted to pull a fast one at the end. I mean, everybody can see right through that. But the good news is that the emergency fund that we set up in Congress is going to be dispersed to the people, and we're going to be able to make that up. But what we really need to do is the exact same thing with health care. The Trump administration very easily can tell the members of Congress, come back. All the Republicans have been hiding out in their districts. They're not having town hall meetings because they can't face their constituents, but tell them to come back to Washington. We can negotiate it this weekend. Let's reopen the government and let's restore people's health benefits. Let's make sure people can get their tax credits on the ACA so they can pay their health insurance premiums. And let's restore Medicaid so we're not throwing millions of people off of their health care.
I think I just saw that the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has notified that next week will also be recess, which means I think that's is that right? That's a sixth consecutive week that he's keeping the House out?
Yeah, I mean, he has completely surrendered the legislative power of the people. This is the people's representatives. And so he's just lying down and capitulating completely to Donald Trump and whatever he wants to do. It's a disgrace and an embarrassment that mean he will go down in history as the worst speaker in the history of our country for doing this. But in any event, we've got emergency conditions in the country because just like we need to restore food, and not just for November, but going forward, we need to restore the health care of the people. So we say to the Republicans, no, don't take a sixth week of paid vacation where you don't come to Washington, you don't come to your offices in the Rayburn building or the Longworth building or the Cannon building, but you stay back home, but you're not even meeting with your constituents because you can't dare to face them because of the shame and the scandal of what the Republicans are doing to America right now.
In the middle of a government shutdown and an economic meltdown, Donald Trump, the guy once billed as the no new wars president, is pushing the U.S. to the brink of an overseas war. We told you yesterday about a report the U.S. military had prepared lists of potential targets to strike inside Venezuela, military sites in Venezuela. Today, sources tell the Miami Herald that strikes on those targets are imminent and could come at any moment. to stop a drug trafficking cartel allegedly run by Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, although more on that in a second. One that U.S. officials say exports around 500 tons of cocaine yearly, split between Europe and the United States. You might say, wait a second, cocaine? I mean, it's a bad drug, but that's not what Trump officials have been telling us to worry about. In the past 2 months, the administration has blown at least 15 boats out of the water, killing more than 60 people. And Trump has said they were shipping deadly fentanyl to the U.S. without offering a shred of proof to the public or to Congress as the law requires. That never made sense. Experts have said nearly all the fentanyl in the U.S. comes over land through Mexico. And instead of boarding those vessels in the Caribbean they've been targeting, confirming if they're traffickers, building cases against them, gathering intelligence on their routes and bosses, they're just blowing them to smithereens out of the water and killing just about everyone on board. Now, amid a massive American naval buildup in the Caribbean and East Pacific, it appears to be about cocaine and land strikes and regime change in a foreign country, something Trump teased repeatedly last week.
And we will hit them very hard when they come in by land. And they haven't experienced that yet, but now we're totally prepared to do that. The land is going to be next. And we may go to the Senate, we may go to the Congress and tell them about it. But I can't imagine they'd have any problem with it. I think, in fact, while we're here, I think it's a good idea, Pete. You go to Congress, you tell them about it. What are they going to do? Say, gee, we don't want to stop drugs pouring in?
Okay, so big talk, dangerous talk. Today, after the Miami Herald reported that land strikes in Venezuela are imminent, Trump seemed to soften his tone.
Do you have any questions?
There are reports that you are considering strikes within Venezuela. Is that true?
No.
That you made a decision on that?
No, it's not true.
No to what? No, you're not doing the thing you talked about doing last week. No, you haven't made a final decision whether or when to. Trump has not been consistent at any point in this issue. I mean, there was a time around inauguration when he seemed to be on a track to be buddy-buddy with Maduro, a strong man who has cracked down on the opposition and overseen economic collapse. Earlier this year, remember this? Rick Grenell, personal emissary for the president, was close to striking a mob-style backroom deal with the Venezuelan Maduro regime to cut the White House in on Venezuela's oil and other mineral wealth in exchange for a calming of relations. That deal fell through. And then earlier this month, Trump authorized the CIA to execute covert operations against the Maduro regime inside Venezuela. And a fleet of U.S. warships is now poised for strikes off the Venezuelan coast. Those ships include not just guided missile cruisers and destroyers and an aircraft carrier, but an amphibious assault group that's carrying 1,600 Marines afloat. As those deadly strikes on small boats continue in the Caribbean, experts say this policy shift from collecting tribute to calling for regime change is largely attributable to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a former Trump critic turned MAGA stalwart who was the driving force in Washington behind a coup attempt against Maduro that failed in the first Trump administration. This is Rubio's obsession and his portfolio. You really have to wonder at this point, how much is this even Donald Trump's government here? Because as the warships are massing and the target lists are being poured over, Trump has been posting repeatedly about the renovation job he just had done on one of his bathrooms. Quote, I renovated the Lincoln bathroom in the White House. This was very appropriate for the time of Abraham Lincoln and, in fact, could be the marble that was originally there. Of course, this is what the president is focused on. He posted 6 times today about it. I'm not making this up. I swear to God. He uploaded a total of 25 detailed photographs of the gold and marble upgrades he had made to the former Art Deco bathroom, including the view from his new toilet/tweeting seat. He also posted about inspecting the construction he had ordered to be done at the Kennedy Center for the Arts. This all comes right after Trump demolished the East Wing for a golden $350 million ballroom, paved over the Rose Garden for dancing with donors. It sort of seems like maybe this guy is just immersing himself in redecorating projects and overseas parties in his honor, while Stephen Miller builds a secret police force and Russ Vought illegally seizes control of all government spending, and Marco Rubio plans a military adventure in Venezuela. It certainly appears that the regime change faction has won their battle within the administration, and we are now in a campaign of extrajudicial killing of civilians and alleged drug traffickers, although, again, no proof seems to exist. While the CIA is inside Venezuela, a carrier is parked off the coast and target lists are readied. I mean, this is either a big bluff to get the Maduro government to collapse, go away, Maduro to flee, or it's a prelude to war. And all of this without a scintilla of congressional authorization, not even the whiff of a plausible case there's any real threat to the U.S. They don't need Congress or voters to get in the way of their own pet project, claiming the power to kill, arrest, or oust anyone they want, anytime they want. David Rhodes, a national security reporter for MSNBC, and he joins me now. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
You've been reporting on this story. So first, let's just start with what your sense from your reporting is of where this stands right now.
It's what's extraordinary is how little Congress knows. Just tonight, the two top senators on the Senate Armed Services Committee, Roger Wicker and Jack Reed, they released two letters. They've been asking for weeks for the administration to put out a justification for the strikes on the boats and also more information about all the U.S. forces that are going towards Venezuela, and they've gotten nothing. A rare moment of bipartisan action against Trump. Nothing. No information, nothing at all. So it's extraordinary. You mentioned regime change. In 2003, when George W. Bush invaded Iraq, he addressed Congress. There were hearings, and there was a vote authorizing the use of force that won in both chambers, obviously. And this is just the complete opposite. It's sort of regime change in secret, regime change by presidential fiat.
I mean, they have sort of unilaterally declared that we are in an armed conflict with these narco terrorist groups, as they've called them. What do experts who study this say about how real that, are the people with outboard motors on their boats running drugs, maybe, who knows, 6 miles between a Caribbean island and Venezuela, actually some sophisticated narco terrorist group?
They could be. I spoke to a mother of one of the men who's missing.
Oh, really?
Run from Trinidad and Tobago. I spoke to her today. He's a 26-year-old person. His mom said that he was a laborer, and he went from Trinidad down to Venezuela to work there, and he sort of caught a ride back to Trinidad on one of these boats. He's been missing for 18 days. She has no information about where he is, and it's just she's incredibly frustrated. And she's sort of asking for this to stop. But we don't know what's happening. We don't know who these people are, and that's what's so unusual about it. In terms of the broader strategy, it's whack-a-mole. It's a sense that if you take out the boats, it will move to airplanes. It will eventually move on land. And you're not going to be able – it's just a basic question. If it's about drugs, what is the comprehensive sweeping strategy to stop this? And none of that's been articulated.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that the only way to make it cohere as a strategy is as both a kind of a brutal and deadly performance of a certain kind of toughness and a provocation to the Maduro regime, right? To edge closer to something that would be all-out war.
Yes, I think the dream scenario for supporters of this is that the military turns on Maduro or some people in his inner circle, and they're just going to flip. The United States has tried to do this over and over in countries around the world, and it has not, gone well. And the administration is also arguing that the military is sort of involved in the trafficking. These stories that came out in the Wall Street Journal and the Miami Herald talked about, well, we're going to hit Venezuelan military bases because they're using them to traffic drugs. Again, I spoke to a congressional aide on this afternoon. No evidence. There are some Venezuelan military officers that allow drug trafficking to go on and take bribes because it's due to corruption. But there's been no evidence presented to Congress that they're using these military bases. So it's, again, an excuse to carry out what's an act of war, attack, Venezuelan military bases.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I was talking to a Venezuela expert the other day who was just saying, even this idea that Maduro is ahead of this, cartel of the sun, they call it, that, it's kind of a name they've given to what is much more accurately described as endemic corruption in the Maduro regime, as opposed to he is running some cartel. Right.
And if there's an argument, it's that he's an authoritarian leader. The opposition
which he clearly is.
Yeah, the opposition, leader won the Nobel Peace Prize for her courage. And that's why this is also disjointed and contradictory. So it's a very strange approach.
I want to just leave you with this ask you about this last thing that Sarah Jacobs, a Democrat of California, said officials were briefing her, conceded the administration did not know the identities of all the individuals who were killed in the strikes. That seems pretty significant to me. She said Pentagon officials said they needed to prove only the targeted people were connected to designated terrorist organizations. Again, these have been designated terrorists by the Trump, even if the connection is as much as 3 hops away from a known member. 3 hops is 3 hops gets you to 1 million people, I think, for most people.
Yes, and there was a policy, a memorandum that was published it came under Obama Anwar al-Awlaki, an American citizen, was killed in Yemen. And the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, went by that policy, and that was that you had to have near certainty that you were actually killing the person you knew, and also close certainty in terms of not killing so many civilians. Again, the Trump administration, the first one, followed that. That's all gone. And in essence, what's happening, they've lowered the bar for the United States to kill people, mostly foreigners, far lower than it's ever been in, I think, modern American history.
White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy Stephen Miller and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem now live on military bases. They are among at least 6 senior Trump administration appointees to do so in the Washington area, leaving them both isolated from the Capitol they help govern and sheltered from political violence, but also protest. Joining us now, staff writer for The Atlantic, Tom Nichols, and staff writer for The Atlantic, Michael Schur. Michael, what's the deal with this?
Well, some of these people had moved on to bases months ago. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Pete Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, I think they just like the convenience of it. Some of this is because of concerns over security threats and increased precautions that were actually taken after the Charlie Kirk assassination in September. In the case of Stephen Miller in Northern Virginia, there was a protest group that was sort of harassing his family, putting out flyers with his address, chalking his sidewalks. Their family basically decided it was too dangerous after the Kirk killing. There's another senior White House person who we are not naming, who's moved to a military base since Kirk because of a foreign threat. And then Kristi Noem moved around the same time, but she moved out of her apartment in Southeast because there were pictures run in the Daily Mail basically showing the building she was living in, and that made her uncomfortable.
Tom, is it who normally lives on these bases? Are they kicking anybody out?
No, these are senior officer housing. It's not unprecedented. This has happened before, as Michael's article notes, it's not like there are people being put in the street. It does stretch senior housing a bit because there aren't a lot of these. These are pretty nice houses. But if there's a safety issue involved, it's an understandable move.
Yeah, I understand the safety thing. My question, though, is a bigger one about how they are supposed to represent the district. They are supposed to be in touch with the vibe of the district, with the desires of the people who live there and the country more broadly. And I wonder if there's any concern about being shielded from that, Michael.
Yeah, there's always been a tension there. Most senior officials in the federal government live in the city of Washington or in the neighborhoods around Washington. And, activists regularly protest outside their houses and regularly do things to make them uncomfortable. Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State for Biden, for months had people actually in tents on the roadside, as he took his kids to and from school every day. They'd have to drive through basically a protest encampment who were calling him a genocidal killer because of his support for the Israeli government. So there's long been a situation where officials can be made to be uncomfortable. What I think the shift here is that people are pulling this escape hatch. There wasn't a lot of examples in the last couple of administrations of officials who, when they face protests like this, deciding to leave their homes. Now, the question of whether there are more serious threats and whether the general political environment is becoming more dangerous is a different one. And it may well be that this is just the beginning of a new way of doing things, that if you're in the senior ranks of federal government, you can't live in the community anymore.
Yeah, that would be depressing. Tom, let's talk about nuclear weapons. The president says he wants to resume testing. We are in the middle, I believe, of upgrading our nuclear weapons. Do any of these need to be tested?
No. In fact, the United States stopped testing when it was actually way ahead on a database of actual tests. And the United States ran more nuclear tests than anybody. And if anything, restarting nuclear tests gives a green light to other countries to start restarting their nuclear testing, which would actually be to their advantage. I mean, the Russians and the Chinese would probably love to see the Americans go back to actual explosive nuclear testing, because then they could and not carry the kind of onus or the moral stain of being the first country besides North Korea to test nuclear weapons since the 20th century. It's just a terrible idea, and it's not clear to me why the president thinks he has to do this, except, I think he's probably reacting to something that the Russians did about testing delivery systems that he doesn't really understand. But it's just a bad idea overall, and it doesn't need to be done.
Is it clear to you that he actually means testing the warheads themselves or just testing the systems?
Well, nothing else makes sense, because we already do test the systems. We do that all the time. When people think of nuclear testing, as I suppose as the president is thinking of it, it means exploding a nuclear weapon to see if it works. And that's, I think, what the president, and there's some other folks at places like Heritage, who at the Heritage Foundation, they want to restart that kind of testing. But people should understand, we test everything all the time. We do it with simulations. We do it by examining the components. We do it by running tests on the bombs that don't actually reach the explosive point. Exploding a nuclear bomb is not an exotic technology. It's been around for 80 years. So we have a pretty good handle on this. I think it's another one of those kind of stray thoughts that just kind of escaped the president because he saw something somewhere and felt he had to say something about it.
Yeah. All right. Tom Nichols, Michael Schur, thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
There is a new piece of reporting today, the kind that hits and you stop and you pull over on the sidewalk and read the whole thing. At least that's what I did. It's a potentially major development in the Jeffrey Epstein story. Remember last month we learned about Alex Acosta's testimony, Donald Trump's former Secretary of Labor and the prosecutor who just so happened to be behind Jeffrey Epstein's 2008 plea deal before landing in the Trump cabinet. Well, he told the House Oversight Committee that he did not recall any discussion of potential financial crimes as part of his office's Epstein investigation. But today, Bloomberg is reporting this revelation. Quote, emails and documents from Epstein's Yahoo account show that prosecutors in his office discussed the financial crimes component of the investigation with Acosta and copied him on correspondence about it. Congressman Robert Garcia, the ranking member on House Oversight, shared his alarm with my colleague Katie Tur last hour over this news of a money laundering investigation. Garcia also told Bloomberg this, quote, this information makes it incredibly clear that there is a massive cover-up happening right now. It appears that DOJ is likely sitting on evidence that Epstein's crimes were perhaps even bigger than have been publicly reported. I think this calls into question Acosta's entire testimony. Joining our conversation is Bloomberg senior investigative reporter Jason Leopold. He is bylined on that reporting we just read from. Michael Feinberg still with us. Jason, take us inside how these two things that seem impossible to coexist can be.
Well, it is really difficult to comprehend how, on the one hand, former U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta said that his office, he said this during his testimony in September, that his office was focused predominantly on Epstein's sex crimes. But through these emails and other documents that we've obtained, we found that there was a real money laundering investigation taking place. And it went on for 18 months, beginning in February 2007, going all the way until June 2008, when Jeffrey Epstein pleaded guilty to that state charge in Florida. So this investigation, essentially, what it shows is that the U.S. attorney who was leading the probe at the time, she subpoenaed all of Epstein's financial records. She contacted one of his most important clients about the investigation, Les Wexner, the billionaire CEO of Victoria's Secret Limited, and she, was working on this case for quite some time. And Acosta was copied on all of these communications that were going back and forth between Epstein's attorneys and his office, Acosta's office, as well as Main Justice, that sought to undercut the prosecutor and try to get this case scuttled entirely.
Let me read from the reporting, and I have another question about that. Federal prosecutors expanded their probe into Epstein's sex crimes in 2007 to include potential charges of money laundering. The lead prosecutor requested that a grand jury issue subpoenas for, quote, every financial transaction conducted by Jeffrey Epstein and his 6 businesses dating to 2003. Emails show. Prosecutors also subpoenaed major banks for records about Epstein's accounts and financial activity, according to 2 people. Now, what is the scenario, Jason, wherein the politically appointed U.S. attorney and maybe even Main Justice wouldn't know if someone that is a financial heavyweight with the kind of high-level contacts Jeffrey Epstein had and those kind of holdings at a major bank wouldn't have been aware? I mean, what was there any precedent where somebody like that with that much money and that kind of sort of social and economic status wouldn't be flagged for the U.S. attorney in that office and Maine DOJ as well?
I mean, it's a good question. That's one of the questions that we don't have, an answer to. And, it's interesting because these details about the money laundering investigation, as well as another financial crime, it's been completely erased from history, if you will. I mean, this is we're revealing this, for the first time. It was not included in the Justice Department report, the Office of Professional Responsibility report that came out in 2020 that took a look at the integrity of the U.S. Attorney's Office handling of the case. So, I mean, it's very odd. I mean, it's interesting that this investigation was happening for 18 months. And in fact, the lead prosecutor on the case, Marie Villafana, she had recommended a charge of money laundering as well as one other financial crime in a prosecution memo. This is the 82-page memo that we've heard about for quite some time, which again remains shrouded in secrecy. So I think with the reporting today that you've also seen from the New York Times about these suspicious transactions related to, Epstein's accounts at JP Morgan and other banks, that these are puzzle pieces that, starting to put together as to why the banks, one, either didn't flag him early enough, but 2, what records and what kind of evidence did prosecutors get early on as they were following the money? And I think that's one important point, is that the prosecutors in Florida were following the money way before there was this, way before there was public interest in seeing that, and before, Congress started taking that on as well.
I mean, Michael Feinberg, it adds such depth to the political hunger. Again, this is an 80-20 issue. 81% of Americans would like to see the files released and believe Donald Trump is covering something up. He actually fares the worst, is viewed as most culpable, but his senior Department of Justice leaders don't fare very well either when those questions are asked by pollsters. But the money and the transactions, those are not subject to the sorts of character assassination that the victims of sex trafficking, some of them were children when those crimes took place. The documents are the documents. It seems like that would be a rather easy thing to release publicly.
Yeah, financial statements generally don't lie. It is, as you mentioned, hard to undermine their character. They don't shade the truth. They are printed numbers and words on a page, authoritatively provided by a bank or credit institution. But what this reporting reveals is that with every new fact we learn about that 2008 plea deal, we realize more and more it doesn't pass the smell test to a degree we wouldn't have thought possible the previous day. You know, so much about it was irregular. We now know that there was a nascent money laundering investigation that apparently was just dropped somehow, despite the lead assistant U.S. attorney arguing for it in her Pross memo. We know that I believe 36 alleged victims of Epstein were not consulted about the plea, even though DOJ policy generally requires victims be made aware of plea negotiations. Nothing about this seems above board.
With something that matters, whether Donald Trump wants you to know about it or not, food assistance in the United States is now about to expire tonight because of a government shutdown. And while this is not the first time we've heard parties blame each other for the shutdown, and this has happened before. Donald Trump is not uniquely unprecedented in presiding over one. It is a fact that the Republicans control the White House and Congress. And it's also a fact that Donald Trump promised, above all else last year when he was campaigning, to improve people's daily lives, prices, groceries, food, basic stuff. And maybe he was effective on the messaging, but it is now also a fact that he is failing on delivering the results. And what does failure look like? Remember, there are still rules in this country. There's still some emergency mechanisms. When we say there's a government shutdown, it affects a lot of people, but it doesn't mean the federal government stops doing anything. And the courts are still open, of course, which brings us to the news late tonight. A federal judge in Rhode Island ordering President Trump to go forward and release the funds which are available for food assistance next month. So a November's worth of funding for what they call SNAP. Because the judge says that's necessary and available, the funds exist, and Trump, for some reason, didn't see people going hungry as an emergency enough reason to free up those funds. Now, here's exactly what the judge said in the ruling. There's no doubt that the $6 billion in contingency funds are appropriated funds that are, without a doubt, necessary to carry out the program's operation. Again, as I mentioned, some things get paused in a shutdown, but here the money's available, and hungry children are not the first thing that under law the Congress wanted to be sacrificed, even when there is a shutdown of part of the government. Another judge in Boston found the administration's suspension of those benefits is probably unlawful. They said likely unlawful. They are still weighing a final ruling over there. Now, this matters to 40 million Americans. Food pantries are seeing huge demand. We are here on a holiday evening. Republicans control the Congress and the White House. And there are many ways to respond to this. For example, you could say, this is bad, but we need to reopen the government. Or this is regrettable. Let's all come back to Washington and try to fix it. But that's not exactly the main response we're hearing. Again, we just do the news. We'll just tell you what they're saying, right? A House Republican said the people on food assistance who haven't pre-saved groceries are basically smoking crack, and they should stop. J.D. Vance had this to say.
We're going to find out the hard way with SNAP benefits. The American people are already suffering, and the suffering is going to get a lot worse.
The suffering is going to get worse, he says. 24 million Americans are also looking at what could be higher healthcare prices because Obamacare's marketplace reopens tomorrow. Premiums could more than double going through next year. That's on average. And the reason is government policy. Republicans won, and they are exercising their power to cut the funds that subsidize that. So that's the direct result. Now, when you ask the public, how's this going right now? People do not like the shutdown. Nobody likes higher healthcare prices. You don't really need a poll for that. But the most recent polling shows more people are blaming Trump and the Republicans for this shutdown right now as opposed to the Democrats. And I can tell you again, calling it straight, we've seen a lot of shutdowns where there is blame to go around. But this time, you do have one-party control of Congress and the White House. The Democrats' condition, the main thing they wanted was to keep those health care costs affordable, which also is pretty popular. Nationwide, we're seeing the reaction.
We're about to lose our food stamps. Mind you, we both work.
My son won't have his milk, and we won't have food.
I did everything right. Everything right. I was in the Army.
I'll go without eating it or anything as long as my kids eat.
Over 4 million people are going to lose their health care through the marketplace.
There's 4 of y'all. It's not feasible. We don't know how long this is going to last.
Some of the real people affected, the real voices out in real America tonight. It is a holiday. We're going into the weekend, but a lot of people are not able to enjoy it carefree because of the failure of this president and this Congress to keep the government open. I want to bring in Juanita Tolliver, Democratic strategist, author, host of the Archival podcast. Welcome, Juanita. Happy Halloween. You see there a kind of Republican anger or even threat. It's going to get worse is sort of their messaging. And I understand that in shutdowns, the blame can go around. I mean, so many things are unusual in the Trump era. This actually isn't. We've seen this before. But there doesn't seem to be any great empathy or concern about fixing it against that polling. How does this all play out in your view?
Ari, I appreciate you defining what J.D. Vance said as a potential threat, because based on the reporting, it's been clear that this contingency fund was earmarked by the USDA before the shutdown began as a resource to continue to provide SNAP benefits during the shutdown. That $6 billion was there. I appreciate the judge in Rhode Island saying the Trump administration made an erroneous decision to not use those funds to continue to supply SNAP. And calling that out emphasizes that this crisis is effectively manufactured by Trump and Republicans' decisions to not proactively engage and use those emergency resources that were already earmarked by the USDA. I think emphasizing that for the people, especially the people that you just highlighted, emphasizing the very real impact this means for them missing meals, for their children not to have the milk that they need. It highlights the human face and impact of the 42 million people that will stand to be hurt at a moment when the losses feel compounded, Ari, because people were already struggling to pay for their groceries each month. People were already turning to credit cards more. I think back in March, it was announced that even collaborations like buy now, pay later between Klarna and DoorDash were introduced because access to food has long been an issue for people to be able to pay from their accounts regularly. And so this response to SNAP with J.D. Vance saying it will get worse, that pain I don't think can be understated at all, because it's not something that food banks can just backfill. They cannot meet the response of the need that's going to be presented when these benefits might not be there on cards that people are typically expecting every single month at the beginning of the month.
Yeah, that makes sense. We're headed into November. We've got, of course, Thanksgiving's the largest travel day of the year next month. But air travel has been taking a hit under the same shutdown effects. Airports have grounded flights, shutdowns, air traffic control safety issues, staffing shortages. Workers want a deal to reopen the government, and they want to be fairly paid.
Air traffic controllers have worked over 120 hours now with no pay.
I'm a real person, and this is very, very, very difficult.
You know, effective today, every air traffic controller across the country wakes up to a paycheck that says $0.00.
Our elected officials need to come together. They need to find a way to reopen this government, and it needs to be done today. We don't need to wait to see how long our air traffic controllers can last without money.
Juanita, you know, I don't want to be unfair and I don't want to hate, certainly not on a holiday. I don't want to hate on this or that airline. But the reason that we've always had the federal government involved in airline safety is everyone feels a little better in the air having our taxpayer-supported expert, supposed to be nonpartisan government officials doing safety rather than some company that might cut a corner. That's why we have federal air traffic control. And yet here we are, I don't want to say cutting corners, but certainly putting the pressure on those people to work for nothing and keep us safe while we have our fingers crossed. Is this any way to run the government?
Absolutely not, Ari. And what I recall from the 2018 government shutdown under Donald Trump is that it was air traffic controllers and airline employees banding together to demand their pay that stopped that shutdown. And so I'm anticipating what it's going to look like in airports. And I'm not even sure if it'll have to wait until Thanksgiving, another 25, 26 days from now, for them to start to take that action. There have been more reports of increased call-outs. There have been more reports of people not coming on shifts. And they have good reason to not show up when they're not getting paid. And so I know that Donald Trump had spent the first part of this year really working to denigrate the faceless individuals who run operations within the government, including these air traffic controllers. And I'm glad that they're speaking out, making it clear that they're real people, making it clear that they too have bills to pay, that their services will not be rendered indefinitely for free. And so I'm looking to see how they organize like they did in 2018.
And, you know, people talk a lot of trash about the government or the DMV or this or that. I don't know many people who say, you know what, we don't need anybody doing airplane safety. We don't need anybody checking on it. Let's just fly blind, you know, literally. I want to show you something, Juanita, about where the buck stops. Because I've mentioned there's a debate here in the shutdown, and that happens. But whether you put it all on the opposition party or the majority party or the White House, here's what Donald Trump said the shutdowns always boil down to back before he was in office. Take a look.
If there is a shutdown, I think it would be a tremendously negative mark on the President of the United States. He's the one that has to get people together. I would get everybody together and we'd have a budget. And
they've all gotten together.
Well, that's because they don't have the right leader. You don't have the right leader. This is the President of the United States has to get this done.